Friends, by background I am a physicist, a scientist, just dabbling in philosophy. I haven't really read any Indian philosophy or Western philosophy. So what I'm going to say is, from an academic standpoint, going to be very elementary. But I hope to raise some questions for all of us to dwell on. The scientific quest and the religious quest have been the two major quests of humanity. The purpose of the scientific quest was to determine the laws that govern the order which manifests itself in nature, which includes us, of course. And the religious quest, in a sense which I am going to describe presently, has been our quest for discovering order in the inner world of our consciousness. Of course, I should define what order means here. It doesn't mean the same as what we mean by order in nature. By order in consciousness, one refers to states of consciousness which have no conflict, states like peace, silence, love, compassion, happiness, joy, beauty, and so on. And states of disorder are all the negative emotions like anger and violence and greed and jealousy, etc. So in order to come upon order in consciousness, which is what Socrates said was the real meaning of virtue. He said, there is only one virtue, and that is order in consciousness. So it's in that sense that I'm going to use the word order and disorder. Now, in order to discover order in our consciousness, one has to eliminate the disorder. In nature, the order already exists, and the scientist doesn't create the order. He merely studies how that order operates, what laws govern that, and his aim is to put it in an equation which can then be used to do other things. In the religious quest, it's not enough to just describe that, to look into the causation, but in a sense you are trying to eliminate the causation of the disorder in consciousness. And that's only possible when it arises out of illusion. Because illusion is just a mental construct which the mind accepts like an assumption, and therefore it becomes true for you. And we get a lot of these from our particular culture, some of which may be true, but many of which may not be true. So this quest is the quest to discern what is true and what is false, not just intellectually through argument or logic, which is philosophy, but through direct perception of what is true and what is false, so that the false ends, and thereby the illusion ends, and the corresponding disorder which arises out of that illusion in consciousness ends, and you come upon a more orderly consciousness. So that is called transformation of consciousness. It's different from transformation of ideas or opinions or concepts in our mind. because we are all familiar with that. The professor of philosophy will tell you everything that Jesus Christ has said and what other people have written about that, and he can be a professor of Christian theology, but he is not Jesus Christ because he does not have that same consciousness. His consciousness still has fear and sorrow and anxiety and greed. So he has all the words, the description, but all that knowledge does not transform consciousness. So the religious quest, in a sense, is much more difficult because you can't get it just intellectual through intellectual argument. You can't arrive at truth because truth in the religious sense lies at the level of perception and not at the level of ideation. Now, unfortunately, a feeling has developed in society, also among the intellectuals, that the scientific quest is antagonistic to the religious quest. And this is primarily because in the West, religion was equated with belief, and all inquiry was forbidden. If you didn't accept what the church was saying, you were put to the stake, burned. It was heresy. You would be condemned to hell, and so on. So all inquiry in the religious dimension was forbidden. In the East, in all the religions of the East, there was a concept of God, there was belief, there were rituals, there was prayer, but there has also been this long tradition of religious inquiry into what is true and what is false. Whether you take a Hinduism in the Upanishads, the Vedas, whether you take Jainism, you take Sikhism, you take Buddhism particularly, in all these, there has been this tradition of inquiry, of doubt, of liberating consciousness from all the negative emotions that it is prone to. That, in a sense, is not a denominational inquiry. And the personal beliefs or the way of worship was not given tremendous importance. You could do it whichever way you prefer. That didn't define your religion. So the religious quest, the quest for truth, and that was what was stated in the early sacred texts and so on, that truth is the highest religion. And it needs to be perceived, and that is the main purpose of religion. In fact, Vivekananda wrote a book. He was between 19th and 20th century. He wrote a book called What Religion Is, which says that the sole purpose of all religions of the world is to liberate consciousness from all the disorder or the negative emotions which it is prone to. So that was taken as the main aim of religion. And in Hinduism, of course, they advocated different paths. They said not everybody, it doesn't suit everybody to do this inquiry. So then you follow the bhakti marg, that is worship and so on, and so on. So there were different paths, but there was always this element of quest for truth, and there were dialogues, and people of different beliefs and different persuasions were all regarded as wise if they had gone deep into it, irrespective of the belief, the particular belief which they held. So there are in Hinduism thousands of gurus with different beliefs, and they were all Hindus, because Hinduism not defined by belief. That was quite different from the way it was in the West, particularly in Christianity. It was the Buddha who, in a sense, emphasized 2500 years ago that the essence of religion is this quest for truth, and that all disorder in our consciousness arises out of illusions, and therefore it can be ended. He used the word, ignorance is the cause of sorrow, sorrow as psychological suffering. And ignorance not as lack of knowledge, but as illusion. Now, illusion means there is something which I am accepting as true when it is not true. It's not a fact in nature, it's just a construct which I am accepting. Or I am giving tremendous importance to something which is really not all that important in life. So if you wanted to end illusion in your mind, you have to doubt whatever you are thinking, whatever you have imbibed from your culture, and hold it lightly. It's there in your memory, but you don't identify with it, you don't accept it as true, and you are willing to inquire into it and willing to drop it if it is found that that is illusory. So in a way, it is a learning mind. The religious mind was a learning mind, learning to discern what is true from what is false through observation. And when you regard religion in that way, then this antagonism between science and religion disappears, because they become two complementary quests for truth. One, the truth about nature, which is matter, energy, space and time, and the other about the truth about the way consciousness functions, our consciousness functions. And both are part of reality, because the world of nature is reality and our consciousness is also reality. It exists. So it seems to me that these are really two complementary quests, and that this feeling that has come up that somehow science and religion are contradictory, and therefore you cannot have a mind which is both scientific and religious at the same time, and you must specialize. Either you must be a scientist or you can be a religious man, but you can't be both. And this has had, in my view, very dire consequences, because we have created throughout the world a civilization which is very clever and which defines intelligence as the ability to do science and to use computers and so on. And we have come upon great expertise in knowledge, but we have not come upon wisdom. And wisdom is there in a mind which has freed itself of illusion, because when you live with illusion, you are not living in the real world, you are living in some conceptual world of your own creation. You are not in contact with truth. And so that's not wisdom. So the question I would like to raise is, we know how we all grow in knowledge. And how does a human being grow in wisdom? Because without wisdom, knowledge is dangerous. Knowledge gives you power, it gives you ability to earn money, which is also power. But power can be used destructively or constructively. So what tells you which way to use it? I mean, Einstein gave us the equation E is equal to mc square. That's a great truth about nature. That matter is also a form of energy, and they are interconvertible. You can use it to make a bomb, or you can use it to generate electricity. What decides which way we are going to use it? That depends on your wisdom, your consciousness. And so, this lopsided development of the human mind, extremely clever in the field of knowledge and expertise, and very primitive in the religious inquiry, lacking wisdom, lacking love and compassion. That is the present state of humanity. And all the things, the disorder that we are seeing in the world today, about which we are reading every day in the newspapers, are telling us that we have not discovered what right living is. But we think we are extremely intelligent, right? If we are really intelligent, why are we living like this? Why do we have all these problems? And it's not as if those problems are on account of the uneducated and illiterate villager in Argentina or India or Africa. No, these problems are the creation of highly educated minds, PhDs, LLBs, people like you and me who become ministers, presidents, army men, scientists, nuclear scientists, creating weapons of mass destruction. It requires a lot of expertise to do all that. And of course, the entire industrial revolution and all the ecological catastrophes about which we are all reading every day in the newspapers. So, the question I want to raise is, are we really intelligent, or have we defined intelligence unintelligently? Krishnamurti said, there is no intelligence without compassion. That means he didn't accept. Socrates said, there is only self-knowledge. He didn't accept any other knowledge as knowledge. And the poet T.S. Eliot wrote this poem called The Rock, the last 4 lines of which define this or describe this. He says, where is the life we have lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in our knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? In 2000 years, the cycles of fate take us away from God and unto dust. That's what he's saying, because 2000 years ago or 2500 years ago, the entire concern of humanity was to come upon wisdom. You had Socrates, you had Buddha, you had Lao Tzu. They were all into wisdom. And then came the entire explosion of knowledge in all the arts and sciences and everything. We have read history. At the end of it, now we are into the information age, where you don't even write love letters now like Robert Browning wrote to Elizabeth Barrett. You now you send an SMS and you write LUV. You don't have time to write LOV. When I was studying in 12th grade, I don't know what you call it, we called it intermediate. There was a poem that came in the newspaper, the New Statesman. I don't even remember the name of the author, but the poem has stuck to my mind from that time onwards. And I want to share it with you. It says, one day at the zoo I met a most superior ape, of frank and noble countenance and of a pleasing shape. Superior ape, I said, pray tell, a thing I long to know. If the summer hydrogen bomb brought the floods, will the winters bring the snow? Surely, sir, the ape replied, after some hesitation, if you do not think I presume above my proper station, there is no need to worry. With such great risks, no man will drop another in a hurry. Ah, foolish ape, you missed the point, cried I in indignation. Drop them we must, we thus ensure democracy's salvation. Well, sir, the ape replied, if you are intent on dying, I see small difference in freezing or in frying. But if all that evolution has done is bring you to this stage, I should be outside, he said, and you be in this cage. It's written humorously, but I want you to really think about it seriously. Hasn't man been the greatest parasite on earth? Quite factually. Be honest, don't favor yourself as humanity. No other species has created the amount of destruction that we have created, not only of nature, of other species, but of its own species. These are facts. These are not emotional harangue. So it demands a certain amount of humility. We don't really know what right living is. Our world is the way it is because we are the way we are. That's a truism. It's like chemistry. You start with calcium, carbon, and oxygen atoms, you will end up with calcium carbonate whose properties can be defined from the original atoms with which you started. In the same way, given human beings what we are, this is the world that we are living in. Each one of us has violence and greed and selfishness and all this division into nationalities and build-up of armaments and all this. We are not able to change that. You will not be able to change that unless we undergo a transformation of consciousness. And that is the job of the religious quest, which we have ignored because we have said the scientific quest is a must, it must be taught, and religion is antagonistic to science or vice versa, and therefore you can't teach religion. So secularism, which means no religion, also means you throw away the entire religious inquiry, which also means you don't come upon any transformation of consciousness. And therefore, if we continue with this consciousness, that's what manifests in our relationships. And in that relationship is violence and greed and competitiveness and all this, nationalism. And consequently, society is what it is. So you can't change that in any fundamental sense without a transformation of consciousness. So I think this feeling that the religious quest is in some way antagonistic and we need to specialize, either become scientists or religious men, right, has had devastating consequences for humanity. And what is needed is both knowledge and self-knowledge. And therefore, education needs to be transformed so that we have both knowledge, we give importance to the religious inquiry as well as the scientific inquiry and the philosophic inquiry and so on. And you can integrate science and religion and philosophy if you do not bring in belief and do not consider religion to be belief. But we have defined religion as belief, and I'm questioning that, whether religion is really belief or we have just assumed that, and therefore that's an illusion. So maybe there's only one religious mind, and all these different religions that have come up in the world are byproducts of the religious quest, because from time to time there was an individual who came upon a consciousness which was orderly, whether you take Jesus Christ or Socrates or Buddha and so on, Muhammad, came upon, broke away from the past, talked about something entirely new, but the people couldn't understand. And instead of trying to find out what this man, their teacher, is saying, they made him into a hero. They made a temple to him. They started worshipping. They had a flag of their own, all of which had nothing to do with the religious quest. So they were not coming upon the wisdom which the teacher had. They were instead doing all this. And that is how the institutionalized religions came about, around deeply religious men. But ask yourself, how did Jesus Christ come to that state of consciousness? He didn't have Christianity to guide him. So another fundamental question is, can one really follow a religious leader? Because that's a reigning paradigm, that people say, well, let the religious people do all this work, and once they have discovered, they'll tell us how to live, and we will follow that. We will live by that. So I am a follower of the Buddha, somebody says I am the follower of Christ, somebody says I am the follower of Krishnamurti, and so on. But what does it mean, follower? You can go and stand in church, pray, dip bread in wine and take that, perform a ritual, all that you can decide to do. Those are not great things about Christianity. How will you eliminate hatred from your heart? You can't decide that, right? And without that, what kind of Christianity? And the same is true of Buddhism. So Krishnamurti made a rather startling statement. He said, Buddhism exists because nobody really understood what the Buddha meant. And you could generalize that to all religions, that all religions came about because the followers didn't really understand what the teacher was saying. And they did what they knew how to do, namely to worship, to make a temple, to make commandments, do this, don't do that. Now about these commandments, you can prescribe, you must love people, treat everybody like your brother. Is it amenable to decision? One must understand what decisions are capable of and what decisions are not capable of. It would be wrong to use decision where decisions have no meaning. It's also wrong not to decide where things can be done with decision. So I must find out. That is self-knowledge, to find out the right place of decision in our life. So I can decide which job to take, which course to read, which car to buy, which clothes to wear, what food to eat. Fine. Can you decide not to worry from tomorrow? Can you decide to be happy? Can you decide to love someone? Can you decide to be friends? The greatest things in life don't come out of decision. And yet, we think decisions are terribly important. It's an illusion. When you give tremendous importance to something which is not really important, like money, find out what money can buy and what money can't buy, and you will find that the greatest things in life are those which money can't buy. Then why is money the most important thing in life? Because nobody has raised this question. Everybody seems to be going after money. And everybody says it is very important. So from childhood you grow up with this notion. It's an illusion. It's not that there is something wrong with money, you should not have it. But you haven't found out what is your right relationship with money. What is my right relationship with pleasure? All this understanding is self-knowledge, because there is no book, there is no scientific engineering drawing which can tell you how much is need and when does it turn into greed. You will have to find that out for yourself. And therefore, the importance of experimentation in life and learning from observation rather than from books. It's like an art. Art cannot be learned from a book. It's a balance, a proportion. A beautiful picture can be made, but there is no book describing how to make a beautiful picture. If you have that sense of beauty, it is helpful to know which canvas to use, which paints to buy, and so on. But if you don't have a sense of beauty, you can't make a beautiful picture. So, the art of living is what self-knowledge is about, to bring you to that, putting everything in its right place. And then your mind is free from illusion. So illusion is not just a false concept in your mind. It is also giving greater importance, too great an importance, or neglecting something which is important in life is also illusory. So to find the right place of everything, I can't get that from a book. It is not an instruction. So I have to learn for myself. And in that sense, I think that it is quite similar to science. Because in science also, you don't know what the truth is. You have to find that truth out. The only thing is there knowledge helps, because what work the previous people have done, what Newton has done, we can now learn in 2-3 years in undergraduate, then build on it in the master's course and learn about Einstein's work and then do research and so on. So it's like knowledge, it is continuously growing, and so science has progressed very rapidly, particularly after the time of Galileo, when he introduced experimentation and observation into it. Before that, they were doing scientific questions also through only philosophic discussion and so on, and the progress was very, very slow. But I want to go back a little bit and ask, what is the origin of these two quests? How did they originate? And I think that they have a common origin, and that is the inquisitiveness that is innate to the consciousness of human beings. You can't say why there is this inquisitiveness. It is a gift from nature. In the course of evolution, ours is perhaps the first consciousness which has this quality, that wherever there is a mystery, man wants to inquire into it. So he asked questions like, why does it rain? Why does the sun rise and set? Why is the sky blue? Why do seeds become trees? And so on. And our efforts to answer all those questions have become science. And similarly, man must have inquired, why is there sorrow? What is death? Is there a soul? Is my body the only thing? What is the purpose of life? And all these questions, our attempts to answer them have become the religious quest. So both the religious quest and the scientific quest have a common origin. And for a long time, a learned man was one who was investigating into both. This division was not there. So if you read about Pythagoras and Archimedes and Leonardo da Vinci, and even Newton is supposed to have written more papers on religion than he did on science. But only his scientific work we read. I don't even know what he wrote about religion. So this divide came at the time of Galileo, because some of the findings of Galileo contradicted the beliefs of the church. And from that time onwards, these two have diverged, and now we have eliminated all religious inquiry and this inquiry of self-knowledge, which is really non-denominational. It is not that Hindu, nor Christian, nor Buddhist. It's just an inquiry into truth. And I want to say that religious truths are also the same for whole of humanity, because we share the same consciousness. Your desires, what you desire may be different from what I desire, but desire is common to all mankind. And so is fear, and so is sorrow, and so is fear of failure and desire for success, whether you are in China or America or anywhere. So when we have one science, because there is only one truth, either the stone is attracted by the earth or it is not attracted by the earth. It can't be that it is attracted for the American and not for the Indian. Why do we have different religions? Because we have equated religion with belief. And belief, what is belief? I don't have to believe that this is a wall. I don't have to believe that that's light coming from the window. When I know, when I see, I don't believe. So when do you believe? When you don't know. When you don't know, why is it not good enough to say, I don't know? Suppose the Hindu did that and the Muslim did that too. He said, you know, my parents told me something about God and they said I should worship in this way. I don't know if it is true. And the Hindu said the same. That says, my parents told me something else about God, and I don't know if it's true. They would become friends, and they would say, let's find out what the truth is. But instead of that, when you are attached to what you already are knowing, or what you are holding in your memory, and you are identified with that, then you are no longer in quest of truth. Your mind becomes like the mind of a lawyer. It has already taken sides with the client who has paid the fee, and he is going to argue for the client only. He is not interested in the truth. And our mind becomes like that when we are egotistic, which means I identify with my culture, my religion, my family, my body, and so on. I identify with it. Then the entire purpose of all my thinking and effort is directed towards protecting the me and the mind and furthering the interests of the me and the mind. That is the ego state. So you may say, I am interested in the truth, but it may not be so. You may really be looking for satisfaction. You may really be looking for pleasure, and you are saying, I am looking for truth. So it becomes an illusion. So it's important to free the mind of all this illusion, and you can free it only by actually discerning what is your state, and not going off into another illusion which is very satisfying or pleasurable, which means I must doubt my own conditioning, what I hold in my mind. So friends, it seems to me that the scientific quest has progressed very rapidly after it accepted inquiry and non-authoritarian quest. So I have a few slides to show that we can learn from the scientific approach in the approach to religious questions and truths too. I'll quickly go through it because we are all scientists, most of us are scientists and we know all this. In physics, you posit reality as the unknown. You rely on observation and measurement, then you make empirical correlations in the data, and you then have to guess the model of underlying reality which would be consistent with those empirical correlations. Then you test out whether this model is an accurate representation of reality or not by applying laws to it, logic, and a form of logic called mathematics, which the human mind has evolved, and it's a great mystery why that form of logic applies in nature. But we are fortunate, we have discovered the language of nature, and we build a theory. From that theory, we make predictions, go back to experiments, and test out whether we need to refine the model or we need to reject it and guess a new model. So science progresses through successive approximations to reality. You can't use this method in the religious quest, because religious truths cannot be found out like this. You can't measure things. You're talking in the realm of the immeasurable. So the way this has been applied has what we call the scientific spirit behind it, which has certain values in it. They are that you posit reality as the unknown. That means you posit the truth as the unknown. You rely on inquiry, observation. You encourage questioning and doubt all conclusions. Have an open mind. The non-acceptance of authority and the respect, therefore, for dissent. Demand evidence, proof, reason. Objectivity, which means the facts must be independent of the observer. The universality, that the truth is independent of time and space. Reproducibility, it should be possible to reproduce that experiment and do it. And I would like to add a ninth one, a sort of international dialogue which goes on in science, where I publish my findings, somebody else reads it in a journal, repeats that experiment or reports his own views on it, I read that, and so ultimately we are interested in finding out what the truth is. The entire body, even though I don't know those people, I'm internationally in a dialogue with them. So Feynman gave a definition of science which I like very much. He said science is a body of knowledge, some of which is nearly certain, some rather uncertain, but none of it completely certain. Now it seems to me that though the scientific method is not applicable, this scientific spirit is applicable to religious questions. Instead of believing, instead of asserting one's own idea, if one posits the truth as the unknown and wants to discover it through dialogue, through observation, through questioning, then you can use this and you avoid all the problems of division between different religions and so on. I have here some quotations from senior scientists. Galileo saying mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. Heisenberg said science points to some central design, some purpose in the universe. Einstein says the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogma and theology. Covering both the natural and the spiritual, it should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity. Schumacher says the modern experiment to live without religion has failed. And Schrödinger, I like this view which he expressed. He says, I consider science an integrating part of our endeavor to understand the one great philosophical question which embraces all others. Who are we? I consider this not one of the tasks, but the task of science, the only one that counts. So you must explain not only where the atoms in this body have come and how they have come into the position in which they are, but also you must explain what consciousness is and all the consciousness phenomena. So don't limit science only to the measurable. This is also science. This is also a quest for truth. You can't use that scientific method, but you can use that approach. More quotations from Einstein. I'll skip this and I'll end with what Krishnamurti wrote on the religious mind. He said, the religious mind has no beliefs. It has no dogma. It moves from fact to fact, and therefore the religious mind is the scientific mind. But the scientific mind is not the religious mind. The religious mind includes the scientific mind, but the mind trained in the knowledge of science is not a religious mind. All right, I'll end it here and throw it open for discussion.
Almost 45 minutes.
Yes.
I'd like to hear you unpack the question of what is truth further.
Sure.
Because what you've done is you've said, go in and we get inner knowledge. But I can tell you that there are many mental states
Yes.
that people have, and they will come to quite different understandings of what
Yes.
knowledge is. So if I try to go inside in one particular mental state, I'll find a completely different set of knowledge. But not only that, we now know that the experience of the individual determines their worldview, determines how the brain works.
Yeah.
And so how can we, in this age now, argue that inside is the truth? I'd like to hear you unpack that.
Very good question. First, let's begin simply. We find that truth is, by truth, we mean different things in different realms. Your son comes back from school and you ask him what happened at school, and he tells you, and you can say, are you telling the truth? There you mean by truth is your description an accurate representation of what actually took place, or are you distorting it, and so on. So that's one meaning we give to the word truth. Then we also say the law of gravitation is a great truth about nature. So when there is a cause and effect relationship which has been found to always hold, you call it that also as truth. Religious truth is neither of these. Religious truth is something much more subtle. It comes into existence when a consciousness perceives the fact, what is, without any distortion. That means no interference from, no projection from my own mind, from my own memories, my own past background. Then what you see is a direct perception of the truth. And that's why it is not simple to come upon religious truth, because you must first free the mind of all this illusion. And the greatest source of illusion is the ego. This identification with the me and the mind. Right? And that means you are not really in quest of truth at all. Or you are just intellectually dabbling in what is truth. You are not actually, so it becomes a source because somehow India feels more important than the rest of the world. My family seems more important. My opinions become more important, right? You have to question that. Why? I grew up, I didn't decide where I would be born. I imbibed from my environment certain things which are put in my memory. I have all the biological instincts which have come over from millions of years of past. Then superposed on that is 2,000-3,000 years of Hinduism as the religion in which I grew up. That's also sitting there in my memory. On top of it are the experiences I have had and the knowledge I have acquired and so on, which was physics. That's my conditioning, that's the content of my memory. And from that comes the reaction from my brain, which is thrown up into, it's a very partial, very subjective thing. It's not the truth. So why do I identify with that? Can I look at my own opinions and what my brain projects the same way as what my friend is saying? because he's coming from another conditioning, and that conditioning expressing another opinion about the same thing. But somehow I prefer mine to his, and that's the problem with the ego. So if you don't prefer, you know that this is also an opinion, that is also an opinion, and no opinion is important, because no opinion is fact. And I'm interested in the fact, so you hold all opinions lightly, like the scientist holds theories. He'll drop his theory the moment one experiment shows that it's not true, what your assumptions were not true. He's happy that he discovered that he was on a wrong track. But over here, when somebody criticizes you, you get upset, you get angry with that person and so on. So you have to understand this whole psychological manifestation within oneself. And unless one is free, or at least relatively free of this ego process, it takes over completely and builds new illusions. So the question I would like to give is, we all have a lot of experiences. What determines whether you will pick up a truth out of experience, or you will pick up another illusion, another prejudice? Because prejudice also comes from experience. So that's why experience doesn't bring wisdom. Otherwise, all old people should be wise. It's not an observed fact. Right? So experience is not going to bring me wisdom. Then what brings wisdom? So that's why this inquiry is extremely important. And without wisdom, you have no basis for your thinking. You're just going on with your brand of illusion and projecting it and trying to convert other people to your illusion and all that kind of thing, which mischief we know what is going on in the world. So it can't change so long as this ego process is going on. And that is why liberation from the ego is a first requirement. Learning doesn't even begin until you're relatively free from this ego process, because you're not interested in the truth. So that's the difficulty of this quest. I'm not saying a scientific quest is much easier to do, because that's like knowledge, right? But if it is necessary, that is what is necessary, we are lacking in wisdom, we should be applying ourselves to that. But we spend 20 years learning how a computer works or how the rocket goes to the moon, and we think just one evening with some guru, I should get this. You won't get this so simply. Yeah.
I think one of the difficulties that I have with that thesis, and I absolutely accept, just by the way, that you can actually get to ultimate truth, but putting it forward, if, for example, I had Asperger's disease, and in other words, the structure of my brain or the structure of my consciousness is different, then I will come upon a whole set of different truths. How are you going to know which are the correct truths?
It's not necessary to know. It is only necessary to hold your own conjectures lightly. And if they are producing no disorder in your consciousness, they are innocent things, even if they are illusions. Like fairy tales. Fairy tales are illusions, but we know that they are not true. Right? If you started imagining that they are true, that would constitute an illusion and produce all kinds of things out of it. So, if I have a little time, I would like to go into this, the nature of illusion. At the very superficial level, the illusions are what we call superstitions. They go away even with learning science and intellectual inquiry. They produce a lot of fear. I mean, a Christian is really scared when he is allotted seat number 13 in a plane or a hotel, in a hotel. That fear is entirely imaginary. Right? It's an illusion. We can get over that. Then there are all these cultural illusions. The attachment to your religion, your particular culture, all those moral values, and you call that morality when you see that it is cruel, it is discriminatory. Men have dominated over women with their concept of what a woman should be or should not be, and created a lot of discrimination. but thinking that this is morality, those women are immoral, therefore they are like that, and so on, right? So the problem with illusion is that the man who has the illusion is not aware that he is in illusion. So don't accept that what your mind is telling you is true. Be prepared to examine it again, all over again, because it is not so easy to be with the truth, and you can land up in an illusion. So whatever, it's not important to know that I already have the truth. In fact, that knowledge is dangerous. In a sense, Hitler thought he had the truth, that Nazis are superior to all other races and so on. So beware of this feeling of the man who says, I know the truth. He does not know.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your balanced and very clear talk. But I would like once again to warn you against excessive fascination for science, even though I was trained also as a scientist. I think, science has in it part of the ideal you were developing, but it has also in it many other things. For instance, it has extreme belief in a certain unique narrative about the origin of the world. It has belief also for, the necessity of pushing in the background consciousness in order to get objective knowledge.
Yeah.
And therefore, if we accept all these parts of science, we go into what I call the illusion of the Western culture.
Yes.
Our illusion is precisely that science is not only what it is, namely
Yes.
just a patient inquiry into phenomena and ordering of phenomena for practical purpose, but it is also a true narrative of the world.
Yeah.
And I think this is wrong. If you accept that the scientific narrative, the dominant scientific narrative of the world is right, then there is conflict with consciousness research. Why? Because according to the dominant narrative of science, consciousness is just a sort of epiphenomenon of a purely objective process.
Yes.
And therefore, in this picture, every value, every meaning, every importance of what is lived is completely neglected. So there is conflict.
No, but that is unscientific. The scientist
I
who
agree.
says, yeah. So, no, it is science only when you are really imbibing the scientific spirit. If you are dogmatically scientist, it's a contradiction in terms. You're not a scientist, because without the scientific spirit, you're not a scientist. And the scientific spirit says, doubt all conclusions, right? Including the conclusion that consciousness is nonsense and whatever. It may not be true, what you are thinking,
Absolutely.
right?
But I think it's also part of the method of science, of course, all the method you explained is perfectly right, but I add one element of method, which is saying that consciousness is just a sort of, background which is not important, and we are focusing on objective events.
No, but I never said that. And
No, I am adding that.
no, but you see, those are the views of scientist, the man. It is not science. That is not the view of science. We must distinguish between the scientist and science.
Okay.
Science is the body of truths which have been, Feynman's definition was there. That becomes the scientist is like all other human beings. He has prejudices, he has likes and dislikes and so on. So unless he frees himself of that, his opinions are also barriers to understanding. Yes, Alan, yeah, and then yourself.
So I'd like to make some observations about what I heard, not
Yes.
necessarily what you said.
Sure.
Because sometimes what you intend and what I hear can be different. What I heard. And so then you can correct me at any time.
What you heard may be more true than what I said. Let's investigate.
I heard you say that the Buddha gave his teachings, but people didn't understand what he said. And
No, that Buddhism exists, the religion of Buddha exists because the people nobody understood what the Buddha meant.
But the statement that nobody understood what it meant, let's contrast that to the conclusion of the Buddhist first tuning of will of Dhamma in Saranat. He just had taught the Four Noble Truths. And one of the 5 disciples, his old companions, gained right there some realization of nirvana, became a stream enterer. And the Buddha saw that he knew, and he said, Kundanya knows, Kundanya knows. And what's very interesting, it was only when Kundanya knows, somebody actually did understand what he said, that one can say, now the wheel of Dharma is turning. It was not enough for the Buddha to talk and talk and talk, but only when somebody gets it, that's when the wheel of Dharma turns. And this strikes me as parallel to scientific discovery and dissemination of scientific knowledge, and that is, a discovery is made if and only if it's published in a peer-reviewed journal and is understood. Because prior to that, it's who knows. So I think there's a parallel. One point. You said that the decisions we made, we can't decide to be friendly, we can't decide to fall in love. And yet in the Eightfold Noble Path, right intention, authentic intention, is utterly crucial.
Intention is not decision.
Oh, making a decision is an act of volition. An act of volition is intention. So I think they are. But, for example, I would like to decide right now, I will never again experience anger, craving, or hostility, or delusion. I've had enough, but I can't do that. But I can decide I will not commit adultery. I will do my best not to lie, not to steal. And so this right decision, and I decide to choose to follow the ideal of happiness, not by pursuing wealth and fame and power, but trying to cultivate virtue and understanding and so forth.
Yes,
so I think decisions are in fact
decide
enormously
not
important.
to commit adultery.
Say again?
You can decide not to commit adultery.
Yeah.
You are only deciding to control your desire.
And
it
not
will not
act on
free
it.
you from the desire
It's
to
very
commit
true.
adultery.
But it is a decision not to act on an impulse. And that's
Yes.
an enormously important
Yes,
decision.
but control is different from freedom.
From
Freedom. You have
Oh, of
to
course, no
exercise
question.
control because you are not free.
no question.
Yes.
No question.
So nobody is saying that if you feel like you feel angry with your neighbor, you should go and beat him up. I mean, of course you shouldn't. But if you are satisfied with just not beating him up, you aren't going to discover too much about your anger.
Very true.
Yeah.
But in the classic Buddhist approach, you have sila, samadhi, panya, you have first ethics, which is very much a matter of intention. That is, I shall follow virtue and avoid non-virtue. And then from that basis, you develop your samadhi. From that basis, you develop wisdom. And then you find freedom. But if you're saying, I don't want to make any decisions about ethics, then you don't have any foundation for anything
No,
else.
but one is not saying that. One is saying that those decisions are trivial things, necessary things, but not sufficient.
But ethics is trivial? I don't think so.
The decision to be ethical is, in a sense, superficial, because that is not the actual state. That is say, let's say I decide to be non-violent,
Yeah.
right? No, it creates hypocrisy.
The decision to be non-violent creates
Yes,
hypocrisy?
it's hypocrisy.
Doesn't it also create non-violence?
No, it depends on how we define violence. Violence is not only when you hit somebody.
Very true, it's in the mind.
That's just a violent act.
Right.
But violence is also, hatred is already violence in
Sure.
consciousness.
But we
right?
can't make that decision, but we can make the decision whether to manifest it. And I don't think that's trivial.
No,
you
but
either
then-
declare war or not.
No,
but that's not a trivial decision.
From the point of view of religious inquiry, which is for transformation of consciousness.
Yeah.
Control does not lead to transformation of consciousness.
Oh, I think it does. You control your speech so you don't speak violent speech. You control your body so it's not violent. That does lead to liberation. Whereas a lack of control over your body, your behavior and so forth, that's a problem.
Yeah, we need to inquire into that.
I think so.
I have a different opinion there.
That's fine.
But my opinion may be false, or yours may be false, or both may be false. So there are three possibilities.
Yeah, and with one
It is
final point.
important only what is true.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that control creates a conflict between that which is controlled and the controller.
Mm-hmm.
And that division itself is a block, because the controller is the controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's only one final point, and that is, and it picks up on what Michel pointed out, and that is your depiction of science was lovely, but it's also completely disengaged from society, because science is embedded in society. And so nowadays, if you look at 20th, 21st century science, it's massively influenced by the beliefs of naturalism, of scientific materialism, that says we do know what reality is. Reality consists of matter, energy, space, and time, and all their emergent properties. So when we encounter something we don't understand at all, like why is the universe expanding at an accelerating rate, we give it a physical explanation even though we know nothing. It's called dark energy. When the universe is more ordered than we know, then we give it a physical explanation, even when you don't know, and it's called dark matter. But you did point out objectivity as one of the ideals of science, and objectivity being understanding reality independent of observer. This means, as Michel was suggesting, now by the very ideal of science as you've depicted it, consciousness and mind are taken out of nature because they don't exist independently of the observer.
Yeah, but that's a limitation of science. I mean, they deal, because they accept only the scientific method, they are dealing only with the measurable. And there is a lot in our life which is beyond the measurable, which is the immeasurable. So it can't study that. Because it wants to eliminate the observer, it can't study the observer.
Unless we expand the bandwidth of science.
Is the study of the observer, is to understand oneself. And science can't do that because it wants to eliminate. But what I wanted to say was that just as all human bodies are similar, the human consciousness is similar. So when I observe my consciousness and discover truths about it, I'm really understanding human consciousness. I can't watch what's going on in your consciousness, but my laboratory findings of my consciousness are not different. I understand you by understanding myself. So in that sense, it is universal. It's universal. Yeah, I think the gentleman, sorry.
Yeah, just a tiny footnote to current views of science in contrast to what some of the figures nowadays celebrated as the founders of modern science thought, like Francis Bacon, for example, who said that science is nothing but the handmaid of religion. But and also, I mean, what you said that the belief that mind is nothing but a product of the brain is somehow inherent in modern science. I think what we have here is really the problem of dogmatism, rather than questions of science versus religions, and the reasons why we have those standard beliefs in science today has nothing to do with scientific methods, has nothing to do with science itself. It has to do with the conditions of science, with the wider cultural conditions, and mainly with the fact that science nowadays is a profession, and where people, and professions do not emerge in a vacuum of cultural and political
Yeah, my
conditions,
last slide was in response to that. But,
can I just finish? And of course, what you were stressing were intellectual virtues, the ideal scientist, right? And of course, it's really important to remind professional scientists of exactly those virtues. And I think that's one thing that's worthwhile stressing, maybe.
yeah, I think the scientist would be more of a true scientist if he also engaged in religious inquiry. That's it. Because he is prone to all these ego problems and so on, like anybody else. No, his consciousness is just ordinary. It's like that of any man on the road. The consciousness doesn't change because you know science. Yeah, and without that, your science also goes wrong. You use that science only as power and to dominate over others, and you feel superior to other people just because you have a knowledge. So it's really plays mischief. That's true. But you can't attribute that to science. So what I'm saying is, religion is a vaster quest for truth in which science becomes a useful method to discover certain truths about nature. So it's just a small part of truth which is about nature, which is where that method applies, and that it's valuable to get those truths. But you need to engage into this vaster quest for truth, which includes the religious truth. Without that, you don't come upon wisdom. And what is a greater requirement right now for humanity is wisdom. We don't need faster aeroplanes and better computers. It's good enough what we have. And yet all our effort is directed in that direction. All the money is also going in that direction. That's part of the illusion which is directing it. Yeah. If you understood that our real problem is lack of wisdom, you ought to change all your research effort. Yes, Ravi?
Yeah. I think it's useful, the distinction you make between scientist and science, but I would like to suggest another distinction which is actually very relevant to what is being said here, namely between modern science and science generally. The reason for that is that the modern science, starting with Galileo onwards, has some very fundamental presuppositions about reality. One of which is that ultimately matter is the fundamental reality. Therefore, the whole discussion about primary and secondary qualities, all the primary qualities refer to matter. So, therefore, the kind of remark which was being made here is not just incidental. To speak about the scientific spirit is fine, but we need to be very critical of the fundamental assumptions of modern science, which
But one
actually
need to doubt them.
eliminates.
One needs to doubt them also, no? The scientific mind encourages doubt. So it says, this is the assumption with which I am starting. I hope it is correct, but if I discover that it's not correct, I will change it, let it go.
But much of the, actually practically all the papers or all the talks that have been given here are in fact completely relevant to challenging those very fundamental assumptions.
Yes.
And therefore,
Yeah,
really the
therefore
remark
these
that is
people are
being made
more
here.
true scientists than the dogmatic scientists.
I will come back to this when I have a chance to speak
Yes,
later.
Elena? Sorry. Okay, Max.
I would like you to say a little bit more about what you regard as a transformation of consciousness in certain particular instances. Now, as you explained, in the normal run of things, I can't decide whether I'm going to hate. But if I notice the hate, I might realize through various kinds of activity that this is an unpleasant and not a very useful state to be in, and so perhaps I can actually, in the course of time, transform the way I normally experience the situation or person that this hate is directed towards.
Yeah.
So that's easy. And what I want to ask about is, I think love is more interesting. So you could equally say, I can't decide whether I'm going to fall in love. Now, I'm interested, and of course love comes in many shades. And I'm just interested in your opinion
Sure.
about what truth is in that situation.
Yes. Sure. I would say that when I experience hatred, it is challenging me to learn about myself, because there is a causation within myself which produces that hatred. And to understand and eliminate that causation is important, not just controlling the hatred or transmuting it and so on, which is an avoidance of the learning. This religious thing is saying, if you experience jealousy or hatred, that means disorder in consciousness, because disorder is very visible. It's painful, and you feel insulted or you feel angry, and it's very visible. That anger or that disorder is telling me, Krishna, you haven't really understood life and consciousness. Find out what that is. That is the research you have to do, not through psychology books, but through watching yourself and seeing the origin of it all the way. So it's sort of, you become a witness consciousness. You are observing the phenomenon of human consciousness within yourself passively. in order to understand what is actually taking place, not with the desire to modify it. That desire to modify it and achieve another state is a subtle form of greed or ego which comes in, which blocks again. So it's very subtle. You have to approach this with the love of understanding, for the love of understanding, and not for a love of achievement. Because when you are trying to achieve, that very way of approaching something turns it egotistic. I'll give an example because I think, we don't have enough discussion on these things, so that's why it doesn't become clear. When you play a game, right, we are trained to play for victory and to compete with the person in front and then get the first prize and so on. That's the reigning paradigm throughout the world, right? Olympics, and who stood first, he got the prize, everybody asks who. Actually, if you investigate that religiously, you will see that there is the joy of playing the game and there is the joy of winning, which is the joy of having achieved what you wanted. If you give tremendous importance to the joy of winning, it brings in all kinds of negative emotions. It treats the other man as a rival, not as a friend. You want to cheat and play foul in order to win the prize. You feel happy if the other fellow falls sick and therefore you get a pass, right? So it brings in all kinds of rivalry and animosity and cheating, and all the negative emotions enter into it. Now supposing I don't play that way, I don't approach the game that way, I go and play for the joy of playing and my friend wins. What's wrong? The better player won. What is there to feel? Why do I feel sad about it? That's the ego. So I don't play egotistically, then all the downsides are not there. I in fact go and congratulate him and I say, I want to play more, I want to learn from you. You're such a good player. So all the negative things don't come in. Now that's a simple example because that's called sportsman spirit, and in a way you can understand that. But now extend it. The whole of life is also a game. It can be played egotistically or non-egotistically. Find out. Find out what it means to play the game of life non-egotistically. That's the religious inquiry.
Another of my question was that I suppose, the way I hear you is I was almost reminded of one of the lines, I think it's Kipling, to treat success and failure just the same.
You won't be able to decide to do that, but it can happen.
Now I'm not criticising. I'm just that came to my mind. And normally when we consider the question, I think this relates a little bit to some of the earlier discussion there are different ways of construing what the quest is, what search for truth is, what the transformation is. I suppose when I hear what you say, it sounds as if the underlying philosophy is that there are things that I feel in certain situations that I can't decide about. They just happen. But if I don't grasp onto them and notice that they are the play of my mind that doesn't leave them be, then in a way I'm not caught up in them. I can see the wisdom of that. But there's another movement in another current in people's description of the transformational process. So let's take Buddhism. It's not by any means unique in this or fundamental teaching of Christ. The Beatles. Yeah. love, you know.
No, Max,
And that is all there is.
I just want to, there are other questions waiting, so I want
You
to.
haven't answered my question, you see, and
I
would like to say something.
well, can I just finish the sentence?
Which is revolving around this and what Alan, the response Alan gave, he was puzzled. I think I understand and agree with what Krishna is saying. I remember of this one instance in the life of Ravan Maharishi in his ashram in South India. When a snake, a cobra, came inside the hall, and all the disciples ran away. And the snake came towards Ravan Maharishi. He just sat there, kept looking. They had eye-to-eye contact, and after half a minute, the snake carved down and slithered away. And then the disciples came back and they asked him, "Weren't you afraid?" And his response was, "Afraid of what? Myself?"
Right.
No, that was not, he did not decide not to be fearful. There was an identity, there was a oneness that he had experienced, that him and the snake's consciousness was not two. But so there is no decision. Similarly, if it is hate or love, eventually it is not a matter of decision that I decide to be non-violent. I become non-violent because I see myself in the other, I experience myself in the other.
Yes, but there is a middle, there's a middle ground that I keep seeing, and it just depends on the angle. Alan may not think I'm capturing it, and you may not think, but it's what I press.
Yeah, but I want to respond to Max's question in brief. Max, a brief answer is that there is true transformation or change only as a byproduct of understanding and wisdom. You can't come upon it through just some drug or something. You will come to an altered state of consciousness which is temporary, but it will be disturbed by the illusions that have not gone, again for the same reason for which you had disturbance earlier. So it does not really transform consciousness. Without wisdom, which means without love and compassion, it will always go wrong. So therefore our concern is not with change. Our concern is with understanding ourselves. The change will take care of itself. You can't change. You can't change through your decision or volition or control. Yes, Elena.
Serena was really
Yeah, but I think I saw you first.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your wonderful talk. I find it very deeply touching.
I'm trying to get rid of the ego, don't try to build it.
Very gently spoken. I just wanted to contribute a truism really about this division between science and scientism. And of course, Francis Bacon could retain his intellectual freedom because he was self-funded. And those of us young scientists who enter science with this desire or this intention to have the joy of playing rather than the joy of winning, very quickly come up against the economic realities of science. And then we start playing the winning in order to survive within science. And then for majority of us, that takes over. So I think apart from the cultural context of science, it's very difficult to move away from the very harsh realities.
This is a very difficult path. Don't enter into it if you want something easy.
No, absolutely not.
You will have to, you can be in quest of truth only when economy is not uppermost in your mind. Yeah. Otherwise you will find that truth which leads to economy.
Yes, and
for you, which means it drops somebody else.
One small suggestion. I know you meant it as a shorthand in your talk, but could we substitute religious man with religious person?
Could we substitute?
Religious man
with religious person, not sexist language.
Yes. When I say man, I include woman.
I know. but when
No,
my
it's the problem of the language.
Mr. Salmon Salmon, Mrs. Salmon, or
Yes.
whatever, yeah,
Yes.
Mrs.
Yes.
Mark Salmon.
Yeah.
I know she's just being traditional, but somehow it
I know.
affects.
Actually, we should
That's
use
my
the
ego,
word
I have to
woman,
say.
it includes man.
Human
The
or
word
person?
woman includes man, that's easier to use.
Yes, please.
Yes, I had two thoughts. One, which is my own angle, and that is wanting to question, and the first thought is an apparent limitation on science. It seems to me that if the science is defined in its most abstract and ideal way, even the term mathematical measurement is not essential to it, it's just one of its major tools. And if we follow the more abstract ideal of science, then, and mostly in terms of what you said, I think I would understand this, what you're calling religion, as actually the real purpose of science and its action. So that's,
That was Schrodinger's statement, no?
yes, so this is one thought. The second one is I can't help wanting to say something about the apparent conflict between some of what you're saying and some of what Alan was saying. And from my odd view, there isn't, I understand what each of you are saying in a way that does not seem any
Contradictory,
conflict.
no.
Because I understand you to say that decision is inadequate to produce this real release.
Yes.
But, and I understand Alan to be saying that decision is very important to move one in an appropriate direction for that growth. And that's in very simple-minded language. So I don't like that conflict. I want to see if that...
Yeah, quite right. That's why I said it's necessary but not sufficient.
Right. And
not trivial either.
no, not trivial. Well, it depends.
Depends on what you're comparing with. If
World
you call
wars are not
something
trivial.
If
And
you
the
are,
last
from the
thing-
point of view of transformation of consciousness, it is trivial. Control is trivial.
The last thing I wanted to say, just the last one, is despite matters of ego, I've been involved in philosophical environment for a long time, and I find your presentation the most delightful and accurate philosophical presentation on this issue that I think I can recall ever having heard. That's not for your ego, that's partly for mine to thank you, and partly to generate the idea that I think there's great profundity in what you're saying and great clarity.
I've just raised a number of questions. I myself am also exploring. I don't have the answers. Yeah.
That was a lovely note to end it on. Thank you very much.